an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Vor Game saga, apparently technically book 6, for me, book 4, chapters 4, 5, and 6. In these chapters, I can't believe how quickly things just veered off wildly from what I was expecting. I thought we were getting an entire book on this base, Miles dealing with this bullshit, and it's just, he's already out of there. I mean, maybe he's going to go back, but it doesn't sound like it. It doesn't seem that way. Now I don't know what to think. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jeff for commissioning this episode. You guys, I was just sort of thinking about how the way in which this writer kind of sets up what you think is going to be going on and then undoes it, I kind of should see coming by now. But I don't, and it's like repeatedly. So, I mean, the first Miles Vor Game book, he fucking starts off trying out to get into the academy, right? And, you know, I guess, and I don't really think that I even stopped and considered it at the time. I don't think I really even, thought, oh, I was expecting, this particular thing. But looking back, I can realize, oh, but that was what I was expecting. I think when I went into it, I just kind of assumed what we were going to get was going to be Miles, pushing it and getting into the academy despite himself. And ultimately, that is where we end up, right? But I kind of liked at the time that the author didn't try and pretend that he could just behave as if he didn't have a disability and push through it. So the fact that this starts off with this assignment, and I really think I know where this is going, and then it just doesn't. I should have seen it coming. That's all I'm saying. So let's just get into these chapters. Miles has just found that body, right? And it is a weird... The attitude about this is stranger than I expected. Because the surgeon who looks over the body basically doesn't really think it's weird how things went down with this guy. And nobody is concerned about it. And Miles eventually finds this box, and he has all of these daydreams about what's going to be in it and how valuable it's going to turn out to be and how he's going to be able to make his career with it, yada, yada, yada. And then he opens it and there's just pastries in it. And so the surgeon is like, yeah, there it is. He just died of stupidity because he went somewhere to hide his pastries from his friends and got stuck. I have no idea what kind of fucking maniac thinks that sounds like a reasonable story. It is disturbing, but also unsurprising that somebody who, whose day in, day out bullshit is dealing with people's injuries in a place where folks evidently don't have a lot of discipline. I can understand how you would get very sloppy, really, for lack of a better word, very sloppy about making sure everything is done by the book. When you see that nobody else around you seems to have discipline and there isn't any real repercussions for that, it's difficult to hold yourself to the same standard because who is going to notice? It's more work for you, and apparently nobody else gives a shit. So, you may as well just do what you want. But I can't help but be shocked a little bit at how much the sort of, I mean, for all we know, this man was stuffed there and the pastries were stuffed there in order to lend credence to this bizarre story. However, I will confess, and I wonder if anybody else also was sort of leaning in this direction. I had a moment when the surgeon takes a bite of one of the pastries where I was fully preparing for the next chapter to open with them finding out that the surgeon was dead, or that he bit into the pastry and they found something buried inside it, like a file baked into a birthday cake. Like, I had a lot of ideas. And it seems like that is just not what's going to happen. He eats the pastry, it's delicious. He moves on with his life. The end of the pastry story. So I genuinely, guys, do not know what is happening here. And the fact that we find out Metsov is such a fucking maniac, I can't help but assume he had something to do with it. I just don't know what that could possibly look like. What this man, he is so sadistic, really, is just the only word. And he has been in trouble, we find out later, for probably torturing somebody without being allowed to do so. But there wasn't evidence of torture on this man's body. So that's like the hang up, is that I keep thinking it had, but they would know. That would come to their attention unless the surgeon was able to see signs and just kept that shit to himself, which is certainly possible. But I'm just trying to think how Metsov could fit into this, because I just assume he's the one responsible. And you know what? It's super possible that he's not, because it could be just a red herring setup where you set somebody up to be like a psychopath and then someone turns up dead. Of course, you're going to blame the psychopath. And maybe I'm just super wrong about that. I don't know. I guess we'll see. But yeah, so the whole thing is just messy. Um Let's see. Preliminary hypothesis: dead from drowning or hypothermia or both within the last 12 hours. Does this sort of thing happen often around here? I slab a few idiots every year. What do you expect when you put 5,000 kids between the ages of 18 and 20 together on an island and tell them to go play war? I admit, this one seems to have discovered a completely new method of slabbing himself. I guess you never see it all. You think he did it to himself then? So it would seem. So he goes back into the drain, just double checks that there's nothing else in there. Uh, and then he helps them bring the body in. Um, there's this like railing where water drops off, and he's thinking maybe there's another body at the bottom. But the surgeon says only this dude was listed as missing. However, despite saying this is the only guy that was listed as missing, he's got an expression on his face that really, for me, feels like he thinks there is somebody. There's just a sense of like, even though logically speaking, where would that person have even come from? Maybe, perhaps, and I don't like that uncertainty at all. It really makes sense that this whole site is so disorganized that somebody could get away with this sort of thing here, because I don't think it would have flown anywhere else. Um, anyway, so let's see. I'm sorry, guys. I'm like getting used to this computer, and I had just accidentally opened my like Photos app while trying to click on Kindle. Everything is set up different. I have such muscle memory with opening and closing certain apps, and then they're in different places, and I'm just like, what is happening? Um, so uh, the Pattis, who is one of the guys who set Miles up to sink into the mud, comments about how Miles is not apparently very weirded out by handling a corpse. And Miles is a little bit surprised and is like, you haven't had to do this before? And dude says, no, you? And he says, yeah. And Pattis says, where? And Miles just says, before. I don't know why the before got me so bad, but genuinely I LOL'd because that was so like, it was just so incredibly vague. It's not, you may as well like not answer, you know? Um, so he says, at least Pattis says, at least you're not afraid to get your hands dirty, sir. And later on, when Miles throws in with the guys, I'm wondering how much respect that may have gotten him, although it doesn't sound like it's going to matter because evidently all of those men are going to be discharged. So he gets a vid call while he's gone, and when he comes back to his quarters, one of the men notifies him and he goes and answers it and calls back. And it is Ivan showing off his apartment. It's a lovely place with a balcony that's like in full sun. And there's like a haze in the air that makes it clear that it's like warm out. The whole energy of this is it's such a taunt. You know, what Miles is going through right now and where he is stuck. To have to sit here and see this, I don't believe that Ivan is really meaning for this to be quite as cruel as it feels like it is. I really don't. But there was a part of me that was kind of like, oh, dude, could you not? The poor kid, you know? So anyway, they have a little back and forth, and th- in the end, they say a lot of nothing. He signs off. He's just feeling a bit of a way. And the rest of the day, he is trying to concentrate, but he just kind of keeps thinking about the weirdness of this situation and how On is acting. Since the Scat Cat sinking, On had tended to maintain a guilty, nervous silence around Miles, except when directly prodded for specific information. And I thought that was interesting because I didn't really think of him as being responsible. But when I stopped and thought about the fact that Miles wasn't aware of that sinking mud, I couldn't help but kind of be like, yeah, maybe if you had not been fucked up out of your gourd when he arrived, you would have been able to give him information and this wouldn't have happened. Like, if you had been able to do a full orientation and I kind of, you know, at first I was very much like, oh, he's being too hard on himself. And then I stopped and was sort of like, maybe he's not. Maybe that's completely fair. And I don't want to, you know, I get it. I really do. But just my instinct was to write it off. And I had to sort of back it up a little bit. So, um, when the surgeon tells him death by misadventure, Miles says, well, how do you know that? And he's like, what do you mean? Don't you want to check and make sure you're right? I'm not questioning your medical findings. It was just so damn weird. Aren't you curious? Not anymore. I'm satisfied it wasn't suicide or foul play. So whatever the details, it comes down to death from stupidity in the end, doesn't it? I suppose so, sir. There were still several hours of daylight left. Miles was having trouble sleeping anyway in these almost endless days. He returned to his quarters, pulled on sweatpants and shirt and running shoes, and went jogging. So he takes this jog, and there's a moment where he's like, maybe I should just go for an elective surgery. replace my bones with synthetics, and that surgery would give me a really good excuse to like get off this fucking rock here. But then he thinks that that's cheating, which it is, frankly. Um, so he sees this ditch. He like winds up next to where the body was found. And this is where he discovers the box. And a package wrapped in waterproof plastic. How interesting. And like I said, thinks up all of these things like secret documents, yada yada. And then it's pastries. A kind of miniature popover, glazed and stuffed with candied fruit, made traditionally for the Midsummer Day celebration. Month and a half old, stale pastries. What a cause to die for. So, this dude has been missing for a month and a half? Do I have that right? I can't. You guys, this dude was missing for a month and a half. Nobody even like really talked about it. It just feels like this place is just such a disaster. Oh my god. Um, sorry, Emhan in the chat says Ivan adjusted to his quote disappointing assignment really quickly. True. Vicky says, uh, plus he was supposed to work with Miles, who set off on his own since An was drunk. Right. Um, Emhan says no, he was missing one day. Oh, the rain came and he went to save his stale pastries. Okay, I even misunderstood that part, which makes this whole like assumption all the more fucking insane to me. They think that he kept these pastries secret, stashed somewhere, and slowly ate them over the course of a month and a half. And that's why he was in the sewer drain? What are you guys fucking smoking up there? That doesn't make any. That's stupid. That's just very, very poorly reasoned. So, anyways, uh, he goes back. The surgeon takes it a bite, and that's the end of that. Miles' time on maintenance detail ended the next day without his finding anything in the sewers of greater interest than the drowned man. It was probably just as well. The following day, On's office corporal arrived back from his long leave. Miles discovered the corporal, who'd been working with the weather office for some 2 years, was a ready reservoir of the greater part of the information Miles had spent the last 2 weeks busting his brains to learn. He didn't have On's nose, though. On actually left Camp Permafrost sober, walking up the transport's ramp under his own power. Miles went to the shuttle pad to see him off, not certain if he was glad or sorry to see the weatherman go. On looked happy, though, his lugubrious face almost illuminated. So where are you headed once you turn in your uniforms? Miles asked him. The equator. Ah, where on the equator? Anywhere on the equator. On hesitated on the ramp. Watch out for Metsov. I doubt I'll be much featured on his social calendar. That's not what I meant. What do you mean? Well, I don't know. I once saw... What? Nothing. It was a long time ago. A lot of crazy things were happening at the height of the Komar revolt, but it's better that you should stay out of its way. I've had to deal with old martinets before. Oh, he's not exactly a martinet, but he's got a streak of... He can be a funny kind of dangerous. Don't ever really threaten him. Huh? Me? Threaten Metsov? Come on. He can't be that bad, or they'd never put him in charge of trainees. He doesn't command the grubs. They have their own hierarchy, comes in with them. The instructors report to their own commander. Metsov's just in charge of the base's permanent physical plant. You're a pushy little sod, Vorkosigan. Just don't ever push him to the edge. Or you'll be sorry. That's all I'm going to say. I'm already sorry, Miles thought of calling after him. Perhaps Metsov had meant the labor detail to humiliate Miles, but actually it had been quite interesting. Sinking his scat cat, now that had been humiliating. That he had done to himself. Miles waved one last time to An as he disappeared into the transport shuttle, shrugged, and headed back across the tarmac toward the now familiar admin building. So, he tries to find out some info about Metsov, is unsuccessful, and then he calls up Ivan and asks him to go in and look. And Ivan can't do it at first because it's like, not accessible to him. That's an Imperial security file. Surely you can call it up on the internal system. Well, on the internal system, yes. What I can't do is connect the internal system to any external system for a data dump, so you're out of luck. You got an internal system comm console in that office? Sure. So, said Miles impatiently, call up the file, turn your desk around, and let the two vids talk to each other. You can do that, can't you? Would that work? Try it. Miles drummed his fingers while Ivan dragged his desk around and fiddled with focus. The signal was degraded, but readable. There, I thought so. Scroll it up for me, would you? Fascinating. Utterly fascinating. The file was a collection of secret reports from an IMSEC investigation into the mysterious death of a prisoner in Metsov charge, a Komaran rebel who had killed his guard and himself been killed while attempting to escape. When IMSEC had demanded the Komaran's body for an autopsy, Metsov had turned over cremated ashes and an apology. If only he had been told a few hours earlier the body was wanted, etc., etc. The investigating officer hinted at charges of illegal torture, but was unable to amass enough evidence to obtain authorization to fast penta the Barrayarn witnesses, including a certain tech ensign, An. The investigating officer had lodged a formal protest of his superior officer's decision to close the case, and there it ended, apparently. I would be very, very interested in finding out what happened to the investigating officer after all of this. I don't know. Metsov just seems, to me, like the kind of person who would not respond well to that. I don't know. So, sorry, SM Hurtmore says, I was thinking most of the month and a half was shipping time from his loved ones. Ew. Maybe? Yeah, it's really not made that clear. Emhan says, I think it says so much about their childhood together that Ivan just kind of does what Miles tells him, even when he knows he shouldn't, and even when it involves having to drag his desk around the office. Yeah, I feel like Ivan, I mean, first of all, there's just rank, but also, if you are somebody who is kind of aware that another person is much smarter than you, I do feel like you tend to not question things as much because you're just like, they're just going to out argue me, they're just going to find a way to like rationalize why this is fine. And Ivan ultimately, I really get the feeling, is just kind of lazy, and he doesn't want to deal with the irritation of having to make his case. I'll just do it. Fine. Shut up. I'll do it. Okay. Are we done? Can I get back to watching porn on here? That's kind of what I get from him. So Ivan eventually is like, okay, I don't think we should be doing, like, these are really intense files. And Miles says if we shouldn't do it, we shouldn't be able to do it. Okay. That's one way to look at it. That is Miles, come now. That was just the kind of rationalization that I wouldn't think he would even say out loud. I would think he would just think it, but there it is. So he spins it back around. I didn't do this, you hear? And Miles just goes and tells later. He's like, hey, keep it secret that this is happening. And Miles is just like, oh, no, I'm not doing that. Dude, come now. Have mercy on this poor fucking guy. So Miles just basically tries to comfort himself that everything that's happened, it was, a while back. And probably Netzov will be retiring soon. All of this is ancient history. We don't need to worry about it. He gets into a routine. 5,000 grubs wind up arriving, and because they are all such maniacs, his little antics have sort of fallen off the radar finally. Um, a group of grubs managed one night to set their barracks on fire while lighting fart flames. Miles' strategic suggestion at the officers' fire safety meeting next day that they tackle the problem with a logistical assault on the enemy's fuel supply, i.e., eliminate red bean stew from the menu, was shot down with one icy glower from General Metzov. Though in the hallway later, an earnest captain from Ordnance stopped Miles to thank him for trying. To thank him for trying. Is it just that he hates that fucking red bean stew and was like, I really was glad that you brought that up because that stuff is nasty? You know, like, I don't know. Oh, that's funny. Um, so eventually there is an alarm that wakes him up in the middle of the night, and he has to jump out of bed. There's a moment where like it goes off and then everything is really silent and he's sort of like, what? That's not normal. And he goes out into the hall to see what could be happening and sees a bunch of other people out there as well. And Lieutenant Bond comes out. His face looks strained, half worry, half annoyance. You need a hand, Lieutenant? I might, he allowed. Miles fell in beside him, secretly pleased by Bond's implicit judgment that he might in fact be useful. So what's up? Some sort of accident in a toxic stores bunker. If it's the one I think, we could have a real problem. They exited the double-doored heat-retaining vestibule from the officers' quarters into a night gone crystal cold. Fine snow squeaked under Miles' boots and swept along the ground in a faint east wind. A few kilometers past the last practice fields, a row of turf-topped barrows hunched in the snow. The surgeon was directing a pair of corpsmen who were loading a foil-blanketed shape and a second coverall-clad soldier who shivered and coughed into the med transport. All of you put everything you're wearing into the destruct bin when you hit the door, he called after them. Blankets, bedding, splints, everything. Full decontamination showers for you all before you even start to worry about that broken leg of his. The painkiller will hold him through it, and if it doesn't, ignore him and keep scrubbing. I'll be right behind you. The surgeon shuddered, turning away, whistling dismay through his teeth. Bond headed for the bunker door. Don't open that, the surgeon and the fire marshal called together. There's nobody left inside, all evacuated now. What exactly happened? A couple of guys were moving stores to make room for a new shipment coming in tomorrow. They dumped their loader over, got one pinned underneath with a broken leg. That took ingenuity. They had to have been horsing around, but that's not the worst of it. They took several barrels of fetane over with them, and at least two broke open. The stuff's all over the place in there. We've sealed the bunker as best we could. Cleanup is your problem. I'm gone. So, fetane, evidently, is a poison that was invented as a weapon, but had not ever actually been used and is obsolete at this point. They haven't made any in 20 years. And Bond is like, yeah, I think that this might be like the last stockpile on Barrier, period. Those barrels, though, they shouldn't have broken. Like, if you dropped them out of a shuttle to the surface, they should have maintained. And the marshal says, well, they're 20 years old. Is that possible that it's corrosion? And Bond is like, oh God, if it is, maybe the rest of them are at risk as well. And I couldn't help but think, like, if they weren't supposed to break, 20 years is really not that long. I don't feel like that. I don't think chemists who are good at their job would store a poison that dangerous in a container that would degrade that quickly. I don't buy it. I think maybe this was some kind of setup. I don't know why it would be, but it feels sus. The whole thing stinks. That's all I'm saying. So Miles says, well, it's destroyed by heat, right? And it's made harmless. And Lieutenant Yaski says, well, not harmless, but at least they don't unravel all the DNA in your balls. Are there any explosives stored in there, Lieutenant Bond? No, only the fetane. If you tossed a couple of plasma mines through the door, would the fetane all be chemically cracked before the roof melted in? You wouldn't want the roof to melt in, or the floor, if that stuff ever got loose in the permafrost. But if you set the mines on slow heat release and threw a few kilos of neutral plastsealant with them, the bunker might be self-sealing. Yeah, that'd work. In fact, that could be the safest way to deal with that crap, particularly if the rest of the barrels are starting to lose integrity too, depending on which way the wind is blowing. We're expecting a light east wind with dropping temperatures till about 0700 tomorrow morning, Miles answered. Then it'll shift to the north and blow harder. Potential wah-wah conditions starting around 1800 tomorrow night. All right, I'll round up my crew, you round up yours, I'll pull the plans for the bunker, calculate the charge's release rate, and meet you and the ordnance chief and admin in an hour. So, they set things up. Miles goes back with Bond to the admin building. He's looking at the computers, making sure that his predictions are right on the weather and that nothing major has changed. And he's thinking to himself, like, they don't really need me anymore, but I do kind of want to see how this works and what happens. And he's like, I know that probably even being where I could be exposed to this is kind of an irresponsible thing to do considering my position, but I can't decide whether or not I'm just saying that because I'm afraid or what. And he finally just decides, you know what, I'm going to fucking do it. So he starts to get up and he sees the Scat Cat come back. Bond's office was still dark, but light spilled into the corridor from the base commander's office. The door was open to the inner office. Metsov sat at his desk console, one clenched fist resting on the flickering colored surface. Yaski's head swiveled around and his gaze caught Miles. Send Vor Game. He's a mutant already, isn't he? Pardon me, sir, but no, I'm not. My last encounter with a military poison did teratogenic damage, not genetic. My future children should be as healthy as the next man's. Send me where, sir? Of course I intended them to wear protective gear, continued Metsov to Bond in irritation. I am not mad. I understood that, sir, but the men refused to enter the bunker even with contamination gear. I can't blame them. The standard precautions are inadequate for fetane in my estimation. The stuff has an incredibly high penetration value for its molecular weight, goes right through permeables. You can't blame them? Lieutenant, you gave an order, or you were supposed to. I did, sir, but you let them sense your indecision, your weakness. Damn it, when you give an order, you have to give it, not dance around it. Why do we have to save this stuff? Said Yaski plaintively. We've been over that. It's our charge, our orders. You can't ask a man to give an obedience you don't give yourself. Surely research still has the recipe, Miles put in, feeling he was at last getting the alarming drift of this argument. They can mix up more if they really want it, fresh. Shut up, Vorkosigan, Bond growled desperately out of the corner of his mouth. Open your lip tonight with one more sample of your humor, Ensign, and I'll put you on charges. That's Metsov saying that part. So he calms himself down. And long story short, Bond keeps saying, these dudes have reasonable fear. What we're asking is unreasonable. And the fact that you threaten them with, being shot, I don't think is going to matter, because either way, I think they would see death, and one is a way worse death than the other. It's a pretty unreasonable topic. I'm a little unreasonable about it myself. So I see. Metsov stared at him coldly. If you're going to go on pretending to be military officers, you techs need a lesson in how to extract obedience from your men. Both of you go and assemble your crew in front of admin in 20 minutes. We're going to have a little old-fashioned discipline parade. So, he gathers all the men and he makes them strip in the freezing cold. And essentially, he accuses all of these men as being mutineers because they are refusing to obey orders. This whole thing, and the way that Metsov says, like, it had to happen sometime in the new service, the soft service. Typical old service talk, that old men bullshitting each other about how tough they had had it in the old days. So, what happens here is he has a bunch of grubs set up with nerve disruptors, and they should not be carrying these weapons. They're not adequately trained for this. This is them being put in the position of like executioners, which is like hugely inappropriate. We find this out a little bit later. And when Metsov tells them all to strip, Bond also strips. And it's just like, no, you know what? And when he does, Miles is just like, oh, dude, if you join them, they're not going to back down. They'll know they're right. And it was so fascinating to me that Miles' instinct here was to be like, you need to get them to back down. I just really want to point out that while Miles does the right and brave thing eventually, I don't think he would have done it if Bond hadn't done it first. I think he would have felt the ideal ending here was all of the grubs capitulating and agreeing to do something that would probably ultimately kill them. Which is really kind of fucked up, Miles. You know, like I'm trying not to be too judgy about this, but it's difficult as somebody at the bottom tier in society, as I am very keenly aware, to not feel a bit of a way about how he assumed the only way out of this was for them to give in. So while I do applaud Miles for what he eventually does, I can't help but note that it was like after a certain point that he was willing to do it. So Metsov is just like, fine, fuck you then. And it's very clear. Metsov, and Miles recognizes this later, the whole thing with him is pride and reputation and the vision of authority that he represents, right? That he is a feared commander who is to be obeyed at once, and he is, in his opinion, reinforcing that here as is his duty. And if he backs down, that will absolutely erase any authority that he has. And to a degree, I can understand that he feels he's backed into a corner after all this. The thing is, you did this to yourself, guy. You know, like he really thought, and he got his bluff called, and he wasn't expecting that. So, uh, eventually, Miles is just like, I don't know what to think of this, because is it mutiny if they aren't in the heat of battle being made to, like, follow an order and refusing? Is that what this is? And Miles, like, if the techs had been civilians, Metsov would clearly be in the wrong. If this had been wartime while being harried by some enemy, Metsov might be within his rights, even Judy. This was somewhere between, soldiers disobeying, but passively. Not an enemy in sight, not even a physical situation threatening necessarily. So then Miles thinks my career. And honestly, for me, when he thinks the words my career, that was the nail in the coffin for me. I was like, if you don't decide that you are going to throw in with them, I will never respect you again, Miles. This is something that I think is a dead giveaway. If you're trying to decide what the right thing to do is in any given situation, follow the thought process of why one thing seems super appealing. And if it is purely due to self-interest in like a petty sense, I think you know already. Ultimately, in this kind of situation, in my opinion, the thing to do is ask yourself, after this is all over, and I look back at the situation, what am I going to regret not having done? And I think this works better as you get older because you have so much more experience that you can look back on and realize I did not handle that well. I did the wrong thing. And you know how much that sort of thing haunts you afterwards. And in a way, it's a very self serving motivation because you're trying to spare yourself the pain of constantly second guessing something that you did and regretting it. But ultimately, the regret you would feel isn't self interest. It's because you knew the right thing to do and you didn't do it. That's really where the regret lies. So that's, there's been only a few moments in my life where I have had this like thought of what can I live with here? What is, and I always know the answer almost instantly when I ask that question. What is something that I can live? This is something that came up a lot when like I was taking the puppies in that we adopted. A lot of people were just like, I can't believe you guys like went through this and you're such good people. And I was like, I I appreciate that. And I guess we are, but ultimately it was like, how could I live with leaving them? I would never be able to sleep again. I couldn't do it. And it was just a no-brainer, you know? Um, so, all right. So he finally is like, all right, fine. And he starts to undress. Bond tried that bluff. Now he's regretting it. It won't work for you either. Vor You should have said ensign. Miles could see the ripple of dismay run through the grubs that time. No, this hadn't worked for Bon. Miles might be the only man here for whom this sort of individual intervention could work, depending on how far gone Mad Metsov was by now. It's possible, barely, that service security wouldn't investigate the deaths of Lieutenant Bon and his men if you diddled the record, claimed some accident. I guarantee Imperial security will investigate mine. Metsov grinned strangely. Suppose no witnesses survive to complain. Eventually, Miles is like, oh, so what? You're going to have all of them execute us, and then you're going to execute the firing squad, and then you're going to shoot yourself? What do you think? Come on now. Living or dead, through my mouth or yours or theirs, I will testify. And it's a small consolation if you permit yourself to freeze, I'd say, Ensign. Metsov's heavy sarcasm grated on Miles' nerves. The man still thought he was winning. Insane. That was so interesting to me. It was not, I was fully expecting him to be like already trying to think of a way out of this, that he would realize it's too far. I gotta figure out a new way to handle it. I was truly shocked that he is out here with the complete swagger of the victor. What? What are you thinking is going on here? Like, he's just very disconnected from reality. And I would really like to say, I think Metsov is selling Fenton. I think this is clearly why he wanted to save the store that was here. He's acting like it's for duty. The fuck it is. I don't believe it. Maybe it is. Maybe he's just nuts and that is enough for him to risk all these people's lives for a thing that really ultimately doesn't matter because they don't even use it anymore. I don't buy it. I think this is a man with a massive chip on his shoulder, that he has been up to no good and is still up to no good. And I have no doubt that after being discharged, he is going to get up to even nowhere gooder. So finally, Miles says, consider the advantage to yourself of stopping now. You have clear evidence of a mutinous conspiracy. You can arrest us all. It's better revenge because you get it all and lose nothing. I lose my career, get a dishonorable discharge or maybe prison. Do you think I wouldn't rather die? Service security punishes the rest of us for you. You get it all. And this works, which is really funny. I love that Miles sees him like get hooked and is very careful not to say anything more because he knows that this guy is such a stubborn, contrarian asshole that if he pushes it at all, the dude's going to dig his heels in and refuse to. So then Metsov comes in and speaks just so that Miles can hear. A typical soft Vorkosigan answer. Your father was soft on Komaran scum. Cost us lives. A court-martial for the Admiral's little boy. That might bring down that holier-than-thou buggerer, eh? Miles swallowed icy spit. Those who do not know their history are doomed to keep stepping in it. I like that. So, he arrests them all. And the whole, like, the following hours, he has gotten frostbite and is really deeply affected by this cold. And he wasn't even out in it as long as all the other men. So he is in pretty bad shape, actually. I wasn't sure what kind of lasting damage the author was going to have this do. And ultimately, like, how lasting? Probably not. But his recovery takes a lot longer than I was thinking it would. So let's see, I'm trying to find the spot here. Oh yeah, here it is. Uh, Miles had seen it complete in Metsov's eyes 60 seconds earlier. It reminded him of that definition of his father's. A weapon is a device for making your enemy change his mind. The mind was the first and final battleground. The stuff in between was just noise. Lieutenant Yaski had taken the opportunity afforded by Miles' attention-arresting nude arrival on center stage to quietly disappear into the admin building and make several frantic calls. As a result, the trainee's commander, the base surgeon, and Metsov's second-in-command arrived, primed to persuade or perhaps sedate and confine Metsov. But by that time, Miles, Bond, and the techs were already dressed and being marched stumbling toward the stockade bunker under the Argus eye of the nerve disruptors. So then he and Bond have a heart-to-heart, and Bond is just like, well, I guess thanks? I never thought I'd meet anybody crazier than Metsov. And Miles is like, I did what you did. I just sort of, I had a different angle that I was able to work. So we jump ahead a little bit in time. He wakes up and they took care of the Fenton. They just had me out to check it and sign the job off. The bunker made a neat little oven. So he gets called in. Two grim strangers stood waiting by the door, a lieutenant and a big sergeant with the Horus Eye insignia of Imperial security on their sleek uniforms. And Miles is just like, oh, goody. But then they want him to, like, sign a paper. And I say sign a paper, it's a palm print on a screen, but essentially. For travel orders. And he winds up getting arrested, and this whole thing is just a very different energy than he was expecting. He thought, hey, it's my guys, even though he doesn't know these guys personally, and they're not friendly. I'm just a courier. I'm not supposed to discuss your case. So then he runs into Metsov. Good morning, Ensign Vorkosigan. It seems there's a wrinkle in this case even I hadn't realized. When a Vor lord involves himself in a military mutiny, a charge of high treason follows automatically. Oops. Miles, how do you keep doing this? Bruh. Miles. Come now. Goodness. But yeah, the whole situation, a part of me wants to be like, Metsov knew, but he didn't. I can tell he didn't. Like, this just isn't written that way. And he finds out, like, he is being detained indefinitely on Vorbar Sultana, and that they cleaned out his place and took all of his stuff already. And he is not aware on whether he's going to be coming back or not. So then, chapter 6, he arrives in Vorbar Sultana. It's fall, and everything is absolutely beautiful. And he's trying to sort of absorb it all. I'm sure the color of this autumn, after being in that constant gray and white, must be a feast for the eyes. And they enter a lift tube to go down. And Miles is like, Oh, bummer. If he had been, or wait, the up tube, sorry. Up is ultimate security, and down is less security. So going up means he's going to be seeing the big guy. And he winds up being brought in to see Simon Ilian, who is very accusatory right out of the gate of just like, how could you do this to your father? And I was genuinely surprised because I assumed that by the time Miles got here, Ilian would have been given the whole story. And I assumed that if he heard the whole story, there would be absolutely no question that Miles did the right thing. And the attitude that he has here of saying like, you betrayed your father, I was really kind of like, what? No, get out of here. That's not how that went. So his father arrives. He has an aide with him called Joel, who is evidently very intelligent and also super hot. And Miles is just like, oh, this fucking guy. Just super jealous of him. We've all felt this. Somebody that's just like, you possess an ability and a beauty so far out of my reach that being jealous feels almost pointless. I mean, jealousy is always pointless, but you know what I mean? Like, there are times where you can feel jealous because you are almost able to do what somebody's able to do, like it was in your grasp and they got it instead. But then there are people where it's a fucking pipe dream. So why are you even bothering, you know? Um, so his father comes in and Ilian turns off the recording devices after asking if he's officially here. So finally, you're like, tell us what happened. Miles describes everything in detail. Let me get this straight. You said Metsov hopscotched the command chain and dragooned trainees for his firing squad? 10 of them. Trainees. Count Vorkosagin's face was dark. Boys. He was babbling something about it being like the Army versus the Navy back on old Earth. Huh? Said Ilian. I don't think Metsov was any too stable when he was exiled to Kyril Island after his troubles in the Komar Revolt, and 15 years of brooding about it didn't improve his grip. Will General Metsov be questioned about his actions at all, sir? General Metsov, by your account, dragged a platoon of 18-year-olds into what came within a hair of being a mass torture murder. For that sin, there is no hole deep enough to hide him from my wrath. Metsov will be taken care of, all right. What about Miles and the mutineers? Necessarily, I fear we will have to treat that as a separate matter. Or two separate matters. So, Miles, tell me about the other men on the other end of the weapons. Text, sir, mostly. A lot of Greekies. Good God, had the man no political sense at all? That's Ilian. None that I ever saw. I thought it would be a problem. It occurred to me that if I died with them, at least it would be crystal clear it hadn't been some plot of your government or Vor oligarchy. And he says, will I be charged with high treason? And Ilian's like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to do that again. I'm just going to disappear you until all of this blows over. I don't know where. We'll figure it out. And Miles is like, okay, so what about all the others? It would be really fucked up if I just get to slink away to some private island and enjoy myself and they get fucking, they have to stand charges. The public scandal of your trial would damage your father's centrist coalition. Your moral scruples may be admirable, but I'm not sure I can afford them. Count Vorkosagin sucked thoughtfully on his lower lip. Yes, I could have the charges against them quashed by imperial fiat. That would involve another prince, though. You could never serve again. Rumors will travel, even without a trial. No commander would have you after. None could trust you. Trust you to be a real officer, not an artifact protected by special privilege. I can't task anyone to command you with his head cranked over his shoulder all the time. It was in a weird sense, they were my men. Do it. Kill the charges. Will you resign your commission then? I will. Miles, How did you know about General Metsov's questionable actions during the Komar revolts? That case was security classified. And he tells about Ivan. If you face a secured console to an outgoing console, you can read off security files from anywhere in the VidNet. Of course, you have to have somebody inside HQ who can and will aim the consoles and call up the files for you, and you can't flash download. But I thought you should know, sir. Perfect security, said Count Vorkosigan in a choked voice. Chortling, Miles realized, startled. Ilian looked like a man sucking on a lemon. How did you figure this out? It was obvious. Airtight security, you said, murmured Count Vorkosigan, unsuccessfully suppressing a wheezing laugh. The most expensive yet devised. Proof against the cleverest viruses, the most sophisticated eavesdropping equipment, and 2 ensigns waft right through it. Oh, this is so embarrassing. Ah, I would die. So, Ilian is basically like, sir, can we please tie your son up, put him in a barrel, not nail the lid down, and stick him in some hall closet so that I can fucking relax? Finally, I can't take any more of this. So, Vorkosigan says, well, IMSEC will have to watch him for everyone's sake. What better, more direct, and efficient way for security to watch him than if he is assigned to Imperial security? What? Said Ilian and Miles together in the same sharp, horrified tone. You're not serious, Ilian went on, as Miles added, security was never my top 10 list of assignment choices. Not choice, aptitude. Major Cecil discussed it with me at one time, as I recall, but as Miles says, he didn't put it on his list. You had it right the first time, said Ilian. No commander in the service will want him now. Not excepting myself. None that I could, in honor, lean on to take him, excepting yourself. I have always leaned on you, Simon. Ilian looked faintly stunned, as a top tactician beginning to see himself outmaneuvered. It works on several levels. We can put it about that it's an unofficial internal exile, demotion in disgrace. It will buy off my political enemies who would otherwise try to stir profits from this mess. It will tone down the appearance of our condoning a mutiny, which no military service can afford. True exile, said Miles, even if unofficial and internal. Oh, yes, Count Vorkosigan agreed softly, but, not true disgrace. Can he be trusted? Said Ilian doubtfully. Apparently. Security can use his talents. Security, more than any other department, needs his talents. To see the obvious and the less obvious. Many officers may be trusted with the Emperor's life, rather fewer with his honor. So, this is fascinating. Very eager to see what's going on here. Like, how is this going to work out for him? They ask in general how Kirill Island was, and when he describes it, I love the fact that Ilian says, oh, it doesn't sound like it's changed at all. Or no, is it Ilian? I think it's his father. It's his father, yeah. And he admits that when he was there, he was drunk most of the time. Everybody has their way of dealing with it because it's fucking awful. Did I do the right thing, sir, last night? Yes, said the Count simply. A right thing, perhaps not the best of all possible right things. 3 days from now, you may think of a cleverer tactic, but you were the man on the ground at the time. I try not to second-guess my field commanders. And I like that answer. You know, just being like, look, there are other options, maybe. I can't say what they were. I don't know if they would have worked. What's the point? So, Miles gets sent to the infirmary, and he is being cared for, extremely bored. He is kept like totally isolated from everybody, and it's just super quiet. And when his mother comes to visit, he's like, nobody's fucking telling me anything. Why can't I just go home? I'm in this limbo. And she's like, well, yeah. Um, and there's an interesting description of his mother, of how she was like a captain. And he never thinks of the fact that he wants to be a ship commander as linked to his mother. That this is like, I'm walking in my father's footsteps. And he's like, my mom did that too. Why don't I think of her? And I'm like, misogyny, baby. You know why. That shit runs deep. Of course you don't. Um, so he asks about the others, and she says they're discharging them, not precisely dishonorably, but without the benefits or pensions or imperial liegeman status that seems to mean so much to Barry Yarn men. Which, as much as I know that that is meant to be a lax punishment, is still too harsh, in my opinion. I'm really mad. I want, like, I want to believe that Count Vorkosigan privately sends them money, even though I do not believe they even have the money to spare to do that. But Metsov is being discharged, and there were no deaths, so he isn't being, like, arrested or anything, which fucking sucks. I am not excited about what that guy is going to get up to, because I don't think we've seen the last of him. You remain officially listed as detained by Imperial security indefinitely. And they talk a little bit about what it means to be Vor in this society. And she suggests there's other bigger things he could be doing. And he's sort of like, so how come you're still here? And she says some people's needs are more compelling than guns. Speaking of Da, is he coming back? No. I'm to tell you he's going to distance himself for a time so as not to give the appearance of endorsing your mutiny. And I love all of this, but there's a point earlier that I kind of slid past because I just wanted to get on with this conversation, but I do want to address because I just thought it was lovely. When he first gets brought to the infirmary, he notices how nervous the surgeon is around his father, and he remembers how his father used to take 2-hour lunches no matter what was happening, and wolf down his lunch in record time, and then spend all the rest of the time he had on the floor playing with his little boy who couldn't walk and reading to him. And y'all, I loved this so much. Just knowing that he was around and present like that. There are plenty of parents out there whose jobs are less pressing than Vorkosigan's, who spend less time with their children. And granted, the man has servants to take care of the actual needs of his household. So I'm not really making a judgment call on that. I understand when you've got people to do the cleaning and the shopping and the washing, you have the luxury of just spending your entire lunch hour with your kid playing. But it's nice that he made that kind of commitment continually. It was as often as he could possibly do it. And it was a non-negotiable, you know? I love that. It's such a beautiful thing for Miles to be able to remember about his father, that kind of devotion. So he tries calling Ivan at the end, and Ivan says, "Where are you?" "Stuck in limbo." "Well, I don't want any of it stuck to me," said Ivan roughly, and punched offline. And that is the end of chapter 6. So, I gotta wrap. I'm over time, as I always am. But excited to read more. And thank you all so much for commissioning this and for hanging out with me. Appreciate you all very, very much. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.